Okay, so I think I'm unmuted. You really should know by now whether you're muted or not, I guess. We're a bit down the road with this. So thanks very much, Sophie, and thanks, Vincent, for the introduction and happy birthday, I guess. And it's really nice to be coming along to talk to this group. I guess I'm more on the ally side, but today what I'm going to talk to you about is some brand new data we have from a long-awaited project on getting information quickly from people, specifically interviewing in time-critical situations. And there are some implications within this a little bit as well, observations we have that might be of interest to deception researchers too. So let me crack on. So the problem we have when it comes to getting information quickly from people, there are many, many sharp-end operational contexts in which it's really important to get information in a time-critical manner, to get it quickly. There just isn't time available to do some of the longer, more intensive, more detailed, more thorough kinds of interviews or debriefings that, my kind of work usually focuses on. And accurate and detailed information from those kind of contexts might be used for all kinds of things. It might be used to neutralize immediate threats. It might be used to inform critical decision making and onward operational response. It might be used to get information, intelligence information in situations where there just isn't time available, or it would be dangerous to engage in longer meetings or things like that. So I think we're thinking about the sharper end of engagement where an operational response needs information quickly in particular. It's pretty high stakes. If you do good questioning, you're going to get the information and be able to deliver some kind of solution, hopefully in that sharp end context. If you don't, there might well be fairly serious consequences of not getting that information in a time effective manner. So that's the problem context. Now you might think, well, that's fine. We know with what people do in that situation, they do direct questions. And that kind of direct or tactical questioning in those kind of contexts is, of course, driven by the immediate priorities of the situation. And it typically involves a sequence of closed questions. It's intuitive, makes sense. You could see why people might take that approach, but it might be that that is not optimal, including even with entirely cooperative informants. And I should mention that I am thinking about a cooperative informant space in this talk and in this piece of research. Of course, there are other situations where such people are not going to be particularly cooperative, but even with particularly cooperative informants, that kind of direct questioning approach may not be optimal. One thing it does is that it pushes the interviewee, the informant, whoever the person at the end of the questioning is, into the role of a passive question answerer. Now, that's a problem for a bunch of reasons that anybody who's been studying investigative interviewing will know all about. It means that it's entirely reliant on the interviewer asking the right questions. The information on the whole is not likely to be detailed, or certainly not at the maximum level of detail that might be available. You waste a lot of time asking people questions they don't know anything about, if they don't have information about those topics. That kind of questioning approach is vulnerable to different kinds of counter-interrogation strategies. So if someone can appear to be cooperative, but actually be quite hostile in response to that kind of situation. They can use plausible, I don't know, responses. They might even just use yes or no responses and hold back quite a lot of information. So it's not ideal, even if someone is pretending to be cooperative. The strategies are interviewer driven, so not necessarily compatible with the information the interviewee has. And they might be introduced with that much preamble. In other words, the interviewer comes along, starts asking questions without much context for the interviewee to understand what they're driving at. So there's not a tendency to establish expectations about what is needed in that particular context. So that's a problem. Now, having said that, open questioning is not going to be ideal either. So while it's preferable in non-time limited contexts, I think we would generally agree that exhaustive open-ended questioning is unlikely to be effective either. So that the kind of work we would do in other forms, slower forms of interviewing to elicit a lot of information is not going to be the most effective necessarily here either. So in this project, which we've been working on for some time now, and I'll explain that in a moment too, um, we had a challenge which looked like this. We wanted to develop a kind of approach to time critical questioning, i.e. contexts in which there was very limited time to conduct an interview. So a short period of time. Um, uh, so we wanted to develop an approach that would quickly establish rapport, which we all know is pretty key to having a good positive interaction with an interviewee, the roles that are assigned to the interviewer and interviewee in that context, and the goals of that particular interview, and how to establish that understanding between two people quickly. We also wanted to draw on high quality questioning practice, and we wanted to also focus on getting key target information, because obviously this kind of interview, again, is not like the slow form interviews where investigative interviews or intelligence debriefings, where you want as much information as possible. This kind of interview, you don't want as much information as possible. You want key target critical information as quickly as possible. So anyways, we set off to do that by spending a bit of time thinking about what might need to go at the front end of an instruction to achieve that. And we spent a lot of time looking at rapport, approaches to rapport, but also tactics and techniques that are used in other forms of engaging with people in order increasingly to elicit information, such as techniques used in the motivational interview, for instance. And so we looked at, okay, we need to set up a nice structure for these instructions. We want the interviewee to understand the purpose. We want some goal alignment between the interviewee and the interviewer. We want them to be motivated. We want to map the agenda for the interviewer and the interviewee generally as a shared task, and get the interviewee to understand how that's going to be achieved. So there's this kind of shared workspace between an interviewer and an interviewee. So we developed a set of instructions for that, and we developed an interview here, which I'm not going to go into in a huge amount of depth right now in 12 minutes, but essentially it starts off with the instructions. We had a number of different kinds of mnemonics and queuing. We asked open depth questions and WH questions, and then a final anything else. So this is the formula for our TCQ interview, time critical questioning interview. Now in our piloting, which was fairly extensive for this project, we used a mock witness paradigm, but clearly we had to switch that methodology up because we needed more than that. We needed more than a passive kind of watch this event, now tell us from memory what you can remember about it. It just wasn't going to be appropriate, and it wasn't going to be an appropriate test of a methodology for this kind of time critical, sharper end questioning. We wanted more encoding complexity. We wanted participants to be immersed in something, some kind of activity, some kind of experience. We wanted an extended exposure to a rich environment. Okay, we wanted discrete target information that would be relevant. We wanted multi-critical detail. So we're asking an awful lot here, and it took a lot of thinking and consideration of fairly wild paradigms for this to come about. Anyways, eventually we alighted on one. And we did this mainly by thinking about, okay, when might this kind of interview be used? It might be used in a situation where there's a hostage release, or let's say a plane is hijacked and some people are released, but the hostage takers maintain the plane. It would be really useful to know how to interview those hostages quickly, to get key information, to, or if they've escaped, to understand the critical escape details, which led us to thinking, oh, I'll talk about our power calculations first, because that's clearly very important, but I'll hold off on what we actually did. Power calculations for this study. Again, I'm sick of seeing studies that are underpowered, and so it's determined not to run one. So we ran some simulations to try and make sure that if we're going to invest a lot of time and effort, we are in the ballpark of hopefully being able to have some solid results about whether this is actually going to work or not. We ended up here looking at an N of 142 with 37 groups, and you'll see where we put them. We put them into an escape room test. And this, let me say, is literally the worst study you could be running when a global pandemic breaks out, where you're trying to test people in a group of 4 or 5 in a small room. So obviously our data collection was abandoned, disrupted severely by the pandemic. We actually worried for some time whether we would indeed be able to complete it. Fortunately, we were able to resurrect it in summer 2021. And after a lot of bureaucracy and so forth, we finalized our data set in December. So this literally is very new data I'm showing to you now that we've had an opportunity to look at and code. We had community and student participants, and they took part in 3 conditions: time critical questioning, a funnel questioning approach, which is actually fairly similar to the TCQ aside from one mnemonic, and a direct approach questioning. This is our procedure. So we had 142 participants. They took part mainly in groups of 4. They took part in an escape room activity in a commercial escape room. So this is one you can go and take part in Portsmouth if you want to pay for it. It took 60 minutes. They had 14 or 15, depending on how they went about it, escape room puzzles to solve. They were locked in the room, not literally for ethics purposes, but they get put in the room and they can escape when the hour is up if they've solved all the puzzles. Afterwards, we immediately gave them 10-minute interviews, and they were asked the specific information we were looking for. Tell me what I need to escape the room. So really focused kind of target for information. And then they were completed a few questionnaires first and were thanked and debriefed. Some people doing it. I'm not going to spend long on this, but you can see that mostly these were people that knew each other reasonably well. That was also helpful when it came to coming back to testing and COVID. We had 13 different interviewers. The instructions across conditions took about 1 minute. The interview length was almost 10 minutes each, so we were all in the ballpark. And that's just some other details there. Now, I will mention just on this slide that we coded for solution chunks. So solution components rather than numbers of details. Now, let's show you the results. So at the outset of each interview type, there was a sort of open question about, tell me how to escape. And you can see that when we use the framing in both the time critical questioning format and the funnel questioning format, which both had that rapport roles and goals instruction embedded in it, we got significantly more in that section than significantly more escape solutions than we did in the direct questioning approach condition. Similarly, when we added in the information that came in follow-up questions, the pattern remained the same. So although I'm not awfully surprised we don't get that difference between the first 2 conditions that are using the same framing instruction, they clearly outperform the direct approach questioning condition. Now, I know I'm going fairly quickly through this, but I want to just highlight this for your attention because it might be of interest. Instructions did matter, but so did some individual differences. And you can see there's an interesting spread here of the amount of information that people are reporting. So it goes from 0 on the left-hand side upwards towards the right. And you can see that in the one thing that does seem to be happening with our framing instructions is that you're getting a preponderance of information coming in across people. But when it gets to the direct condition, you see more people just aren't even producing any information. That's a 0 right there of people just not producing any useful solutions. Now, I did a bunch of the interviews myself, and I had this situation a few times with people. And I thought this is really interesting, perhaps for people who are interested in deception, because right now this person looks highly suspicious. They're saying they were in the room 5 minutes ago, and now they're telling me they can't remember what happened, or they can't get it together to explain it in a way that's coherent. So I thought that was pretty interesting and likely something that is encountered in these kind of high pressure, time critical type situations. And I've spoken with a number of stakeholders about this, and they've reported that they have definitely seen this phenomenon in the field. So quite interesting, looks suspicious, but possibly not reflective of credibility at all, more that they haven't had the interaction with the interviewer that could help them out. So I'll wrap up with some key findings. We did find an effect of the time critical question framing and instructions on reporting. We didn't see an effect on rapport, but we were all fairly nice, not too brusque. There was a variability in this individual performance in naturalistic settings, which I actually haven't seen in the lab before, which I thought was quite interesting. We have a number of limitations. We have the strict scripting. We have naive interviewers. But I think the bottom line and the take-home message from this really brief talk is that Reporting tactical information is really difficult for people, but framing that interaction from the outset may have a really important impact. So next steps will be, can we see, does this approach work in the field? So that's hopefully where we'll try it out next. Big thank you to a bunch of people who worked really hard on this project. And while I've got 2 seconds left, I'm going to say, check out the CREST conference, which is happening in Lancaster in July. The abstract submission is still open until the, I think, 19th of April. Okay, thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.